So apparently 2 pages, 2.5 pages is 30 minutes. So I hope that another 30 minutes we'll be able to get to it. So I'll just, maybe if I just read it straight and just emphasize the facts that I want to emphasize. So the premium was on cooperation with each other, not competition with one another. You have humans have only been around for 150,000 years, whereas the ape-like creatures which we descended from had been around for 4 or 5 million years, and then on an Earth which has been around for 4.5 billion years. So the Earth was here first, right, and then the ape-like creatures were here about 4 or 5 million years ago in parts of Africa, and then eventually humans stopped living in trees and they started walking upright, and we started doing some other things. But when we started cooperating with each other, that's what helped us to survive better than any other species on the planet to date. So it wasn't competition against one another, but cooperation. Those who could not learn to adopt such forms of cooperative labor and the new patterns of mental behavior that went with them died out. Those who could adopt new forms of, cooperative labor survived and reproduced. 60,000 years ago, so humans were eventually evolved and changed, quit living in trees, start walking upright 150,000 years ago. And then, 90,000 years from then to 60,000 years ago, our human ancestors reached the Middle East. So about 50 to 60,000 years ago, our human ancestors broke out of Africa. Africa is a homeland for all humans. That we're all African Americans in that sense. We're all Africans. We are all descended out of Africa. Africa is the cradle of civilization. So 60,000 years ago, our human ancestors reached the Middle East. We broke out of Africa, and this is around the same time that we developed language. And so language coincided with our ability to get into boats and cross across, the waterways and get into the Middle East and break out of Africa. So 40,000 years ago, we humans were able to make it to Western Europe, and we crossed the sea in Southeast Asia and settled in Australia. And then 12,000 years ago, humans had made it to the Americas. And so by 12,000 years ago, we were scattered onto every continent except Antarctica. So it's taken a while, but here we are today, right? 12,000 years ago, that's closer to 150,000 years ago when we first developed. The Epic of Gilgamesh. This is humanity's first great work of literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh. And this is important, okay? This was written about 2100 BC. Before Christ, before the Common Era, however you want to put it. But it's essentially based on the Christian calendar. So it's 2016 right now, 2100 BC. That is 4,116 years ago. So 4,116 years ago, the Epic of Gilgamesh was written. So this would be, 8,000 after the Native Americans got here and, onto the Americans, or onto the American continent. Where am I going with this? This matters, okay? Okay, so this is 2,100 years before the so-called Christ was here. Well, Gilgamesh is the historical king of Uruk. Okay, U-R-U-K. And Uruk is a Sumerian city-state of ancient Mesopotamia in what is now Iraq. Now, there's a lot of things. The Sumerians were known for the invention of writing, and I'm going to pull up some of this other stuff. I know I'm getting off track a little bit, but because Uruk is such an important city, the origin of writing, it comes from there. The first example of architectural work in stone and building of great stone structures, the origin of the ziggurat, the first city to develop the cylinder seal, which the ancient Mesopotamians used to designate personal property or as a signature on documents. So consider the importance on the cylinder seal had for people at the time, that it stood for one's personal identity and reputation. Uruk could also be credited as a city which first recognized the importance of the individual in the collective community. Okay, so that's that's fantastic. That's fucking wonderful. Language has the ability for me to take my consciousness and transfer it to your consciousness. I mean, that's remarkable. What a remarkable invention or discovery, or however you want to put it. So this is Uruk. This is where Gilgamesh, King Gilgamesh, was the king of this city where writing had developed and architecture and The seal, the personal seal, individualism, consciousness. So the Great Wall of Uruk was actually built by King Gilgamesh. Archaeologists have determined that the Great Wall of Uruk had a perimeter of 6 miles. So Gilgamesh built this wall around Uruk. It had a perimeter of 6 miles. Today, Uruk's ruins rest near the town of Warka in southern Iraq, and about a third of the way from Basra to Baghdad. So that's where Uruk's ruins rest today, in a town of Warka. And a team of German archaeologists detected a buried structure there that might be Gilgamesh's tomb. But the military actions of 2003 stopped their work before excavations could begin. Gilgamesh, his tomb. We found his tomb, right? We just found Jesus' tomb maybe a couple years ago. Gilgamesh is older than Jesus. And look at this. Listen to this, okay? So when we find the Epic of Gilgamesh, and we had to translate it from the Sumerian language, and we didn't find it, I think, until 1900s. But eventually we find the Epic of Gilgamesh, and we translate it, and we find that Noah's Ark, the Great Flood, that story had already been told with a different character. So we don't even, the Genesis, Noah's Ark's flood story, bullshit. It's bullshit. Read the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written 2,100 years before Jesus even set foot anywhere. And so the Epic of Gilgamesh has Noah's Ark flood story already in print. So why would Genesis, write the Gilgamesh flood tale point by point and in the exact same order, even when the story permits other alternatives? They could have changed it up even more so, but they didn't. I guess they thought that we would have never found out where that story actually came from. But in the Gilgamesh flood, here's the similarities. The gods decide to destroy the earth with a worldwide flood. A righteous man, whose name is Utnapishtim, a righteous man is informed, and he's told to build a large roofed boat with multiple decks and make all living beings go up onto the boat along with the man's family. After a violent storm, the earth is covered in water. The boat comes to rest on a mountain. After the flood, man releases one bird after another to see if it will come back or find a perch on dry land somewhere. When the last bird does not return, the man knows that the flood has abated and offers a sacrifice to the gods. The gods smell the sweet savor and are pleased and bless the man with a special promise. Essentially, he becomes immortal. This Utnapishtim, and this is book 11. There's 11 or 12 tablets, but on the 11th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, you got Noah's flood, almost fucking verbatim, just slightly changed, only small changes. The flood was 6 days instead of 40 days. In the Bible, the water actually came up from underneath the ocean, so there's actually water under the ocean, and the water comes up, but then the Epic of Gilgamesh, the flood just rains down, and that's all it was. So just like tiny small things, they had multiple gods instead of one god, but the basic story is there, the Great Deluge. So in brief, Utnapishtim, the hero of the Gilgamesh flood myth, had become immortal after building a ship to weather the great deluge that destroyed mankind. He brought all of his relatives and all species of creatures aboard the vessel. Utnapishtim released birds to find land, and the ship landed upon a mountain after the flood. So, some folks think that the basic story, because this isn't the only story, there's other writings that, some people say predate the Epic of Gilgamesh. And perhaps the people who wrote the Epic of Gilgamesh had took those tales, from a folk tale by oral people just saying, hey, there's this great flood, and that's where we all came from. And then some folks think that the basic story reflects a folk memory of events in 5000 BC when melting glaciers caused the Mediterranean to overflow, inundating a vast, densely settled area around the Black Sea and scattering its survivors around the world. So perhaps there was a type of flood, and it looked like it was killing everybody, right? The whole world! And then it scattered everybody. So that's one fascinating thing that's in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Another story. Now, tell me if this sounds similar too. There's a Sumerian tale in the Epic of Gilgamesh of Inanna and Hulupu. and the Hulupu tree. So Inanna and the Hulupu tree, in which the goddess Inanna plants a troublesome tree in her garden and appeals to her family for help with it. Gilgamesh appears as her loyal brother who comes to her aid. In this story, Inanna, the goddess of love and war and one of the most powerful and popular of the Mesopotamian deities, plants a tree in her garden with the hope of one day making a chair and bed from it. The tree becomes infested, however, by a snake at its roots, a female demon, Lilitu, in its center, and an Anzu bird in its branches. No matter what, Inanna cannot rid herself of the pest, and she appeals to her brother Utu, U-T-U, god of the sun, for help. Utu refuses, but her plea is heard by Gilgamesh. King Gilgamesh, the hero, he comes heavily armed and he kills the snake. Kills the evil snake that was part of this tree in Inanna's garden. The demon and Anzu bird then flee, and Gilgamesh, after taking the branches for himself, presents the trunk to Inanna to build her bed and chair from. So, you know, that's just like fucking Adam and Eve, okay? And then the flood is just like Noah's Ark. So, you know, fuck your Old Testament, fuck your Bible. When you read, because I do like to read, do not say every word in the book. Sometimes when you're reading, you want to say it out loud in your brain. But if you want to read fast, you turn that mechanism off. And then you just sort of skim and you read, turn that mechanism off in your brain, and then you disappear into the book. And then that's how one can read a lot of material very fast. In fact, even though the spoken word and YouTube and videos has a capability of getting a person's message out pretty effectively, the reading and writing is still one of the most effective ways of passing your message along. Again, we're sharing consciousness. So you put it in language, you write it down, I can read it, and it can take you all day. I can read it, maybe in an hour or less than an hour, and everything that you had thought I was able to think of, maybe not as time consuming as you, maybe not as the same, but, if you thought of something good, then, so that's how you do it. You turn that mechanism off. You don't read every fucking word like how I'm doing right now. When you read into yourself, you don't read that way. You'll read so much faster. It takes work. It takes practice. If you've never been taught that, it's something you need to know. Thomas Hobbes. This goes to human nature. In Leviathan, he says that the state of human nature, which is how we were in the very beginning, when we were cavemen or, Neanderthals or, which is interesting too. Like, who are the Neanderthals, right? Eventually, we killed the Neanderthals, the human beings of today, but we also mated with them, and so part of the Europeans are Neanderthal too. That's where you get your red hair and your... Okay, so... The state of nature. Thomas Hobbes versus Jean-Jacques Rousseau had the exact opposite views of human nature. For Thomas Hobbes, he believes that the state of nature is that we're all born evil. And since we're all born evil, you have essentially a war of everybody versus everybody, a war of all versus all. And since we're born evil, then we human earthlings, we need a strong state, a leviathan, a single man or woman, an absolute ruler to force everybody to act right. So that's what the Leviathan is about. That's what his, Thomas Hobbes, here's a quote. Whatsoever therefore is consequent to a time or war where every man is enemy to every man, the same is consequent to the time wherein men live without other security than what their own strength and their own inventions shall furnish them withal. In such condition there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation, nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account time, no arts, no letters, no society, in which is worst of all continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, short. Because we're born evil, and because we're in this great cosmic battle of every person versus every person, right? It's not every man versus every man. It's every man, woman, child versus every man, woman, and child. It's a goddamned war out here. And because of that, we're all going to be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short unless we all succumb to one ruler, one absolute ruler. And then that person will make sure everybody acts proper. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, however, believes the opposite of Thomas Hobbes. that the state of human nature was that we are born good and society corrupts us. So, this is the opposite. The exact, Hobbes says we're born evil and we need to, be forced to act right. Rousseau says nature created us good, and in the hands of man, we're corrupted. Jean-Jacques Rousseau says that human beings are inherently good. We're corrupted by the evils of society. Science, art, social institutions are all corrupting influences to Rousseau. Rousseau believes that the only way to get back to the goodness that human beings are born with is to be as close to nature as possible. And I believe that. I believe that because I know how I am. I know that essentially my essence and everything about me is goodness. And I want to do good for the world, but it's a conscious decision. Some people could choose evil. Some people might not even make the decision at all and just do as the fuck as they please and hope they don't get hurt for it, which would make them, more like Hobbes. Just fucking evil unless you're forced to do right. So, a quote by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, man is born free and everywhere he is in chains. Now, the truth is probably a synthesis between Hobbes and Rousseau, just like a synthesis of socialism and capitalism as an economic system. They both have their pros and cons. Socialism forgets the individual, capitalism forgets the society. Hobbes says we're born evil. Rousseau says we're born good. Well, perhaps we're born with the capability of being both good and evil. And so if we try to tamper those evil, impulses down and we nurture those good impulses, then we will create good people. Unfortunately, we don't allow nature, we don't allow that goodness that nature provides. I think it's all Hobbes. We haven't, just like socialism, we haven't even considered Rousseau. We didn't even consider that we might be born good. That's why we're thrown into public schools at, kindergarten. We got to be fashioned in such a way. That's why they're, you're taught to learn to walk and talk with the first few years of life. And then as soon as you learn to walk and talk, you're told to shut up and sit down for the rest of your life. That doesn't make any damn sense. Once you've learned how to walk and talk, then you can sort of start to explore and understand the world. And Rousseau goes on in Emile that says that the main point of raising children is to make them strong. And not to be reasonable. He actually throws reason out. He's very, I would love to talk to somebody about fucking Emile. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I'd love to establish the Jean-Jacques Rousseau University. And it would be a democratic schools, kind of like Sudbury University, with very few requirements, only just the Robert's Rules of Order, so we know what language to use to speak with each other and to organize the school. But yeah, so I would love to talk about Emile by Jean-Jacques Rousseau with any fucking person on the planet. Do you have anything? Write it in the comments, okay? I'll fucking respond. I'll be like, oh, cool, you found a cool quote. We'll share Emile Rousseau quotes with each other. In fact, actually, that's a good idea for Facebook. I'll just fucking spam. Nobody wants to like or fucking conversate with me, then fuck you. I'm going to start quoting Emile all over the fucking place. And Habits of the Heart. But, let's keep going. Okay, so Nikola Tesla was put on the FBI watch list because he had thought about making a laser beam, which uses the moon as the source energy, and so using the moon and the energy of the moon, make a laser beam and, be able to shock people or kill people or use it for electricity. Eventually, Nikola Tesla would die alone, some say in mysterious circumstances. Nikola Tesla was actually fascinating. He said, essentially, he was probably the laziest person ever, but he was like a mad scientist. His work today is still studied and viewed upon. You have Tesla Industries. They have a Tesla car, and he would say he would just think about a concept and turn it over in his head so many times and just work on it, and, until eventually something emerged from that. He made the alternating energy or alternating currents or direct currents. I don't know. He's done there's a lot of contributions he's produced, but just the laser beam thing is all I want to use the moon as a source for energy for a laser beam. Excuse me. Also, Nikola Tesla, he had said that when we start to study non-physical phenomena, the science will advance like tenfold. The tongue of a blue whale is as big as an elephant. To give you an idea how big a blue whale is, which I think is like one of the largest creatures on Earth, the tongue, all right, is as big as an elephant. The Higgs boson is called the God particle. So essentially everything is made up. Everything that you see is made up, but it's also made up of an unseen and unknown element of space, which is called the Higgs boson, the God particle. Nothing you see can happen without the Higgs boson. And this is, this actually comes from quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics and the theory of relativity are actually opposed to one another. Here's a passage of Stephen Hawking's A Briefer History of Time. Today, scientists describe the universe in terms of two basic partial theories, the general theory of relativity and quantum mechanics. The entire universe, those two theories. They are the great intellectual achievements of the first half of the 20th century. The general theory of relativity describes the force of gravity and the large-scale structure of the universe. That is, the structure on scales from only a few miles to as large as a million. And he says one with 24 zeros, but a million has 8 zeros. Oh, I guess a million. A million is got, that would be... Let's see, a million has 6 zeros, and so a million would be, okay, it is 24, my bad. So, okay, so a million, one with 24 zeros after it. That's what he says, that's how people say, that's how big the universe is. So that's how big it is if you use the general theory of relativity. It is a million, one with 24 zeros after it. And Google is actually one with a million zeros after it. It actually come from a real word. So anyways, 1 million miles is the size of the observable universe. So there's a limit, it looks like it goes on forever and ever, but we can only see 1 million miles away. One with 24 zeros behind it. That's all we could see with our telescope or whatever it is, Hubble or whatever tools and instruments that we use, whether it's a telescope on the ground or whether it's one in a spaceship. So that's what the general relativity describes, the force of gravity and the large-scale structure of the universe. So the structure on scales from only a few miles to as large as a million. Okay. Quantum mechanics, on the other hand, deals with phenomena on extremely small scales, such as a millionth of an inch. Unfortunately, however, these two theories are known to be inconsistent with each other. They cannot both be correct. So quantum mechanics, when you take, atom is supposed to be the smallest unit and, element or whatever of matter. An atom is the smallest thing of matter ever. But actually, when you look at it, you have electrons, protons, and neutrons. And then you got these things called quarks. And then, they have these clouds and then they're rotating around. And then you can actually, to a high degree of probability, detect where the electron clouds and all this shit will, where they will rotate. And so quantum mechanics kind of looks in a very small, perspective in the universe and then builds it from the small thing. So it's kind of almost like the opposite between deductive and inductive approach to logic. Whereas the theory of relativity says, here's how the whole universe works, and then applies that to the whole universe. So that's, they both cannot be correct, but eventually Stephen Hawking is going to come up with a theory of everything. The theory of everything is when you combine the general theory of relativity versus, with the theory of quantum mechanics. So the theory of everything, and then that's the Holy Grail, the theory of everything. So that's, not the end, almost to the end. So here's just different sciences. A natural science that involves the study of matter and its motion through space and time, along with related concepts such as energy and force. It's called physics. Physics, motion, movement. How does matter and its motion through space and time, along with energy and force, all that together is called physics. And he actually, when he wrote the history of time, a briefer history of time, so he made the book even smaller, Stephen Hawking did. Like, what is time? He was like, what the fuck is time? He don't even know. He's writing the history of time, but he don't even know what time really is. Time is consistent, right? At 8 a.m., school starts at 8 a.m. Everybody gets to work at 8 a.m., right? But what about relativity? It's all relative, man. That's not exactly relativity, but essentially relativity is sort of time and space depends on where the person is that's measuring it. So a person on a bus, a bus could be going 55 miles an hour, but if you're walking on the bus, you're only walking a couple steps, right? You're not going that fast at all. But somebody on the street, when they look at you, you're going as fast as the bus and as fast as you're walking. So it's, 55 miles per hour plus however fast you're walking. That's how fast you're going to the person on the street. But to the person on the bus, you're only going as fast as, as what you see. So relative, depending on where it's measured. So essentially, Einstein and Newton still work together. Newton has all these very specific laws and calculations which work most of the time. But Einstein just says, well, it's relative depending on where the person who is measuring the space and time. That's physics, okay? So physics is a natural science, involves the study of matter and its motion through space and time, along with related concepts such as energy and force. One of the most fundamental scientific disciplines. The main goal of physics is to understand how the universe behaves. A natural science concerning the study of life and living organisms, including their structure, function, growth, evolution, distribution, and taxonomy. It's called biology. Again, biology is a natural science concerned with the study of life and living organisms, including their structure, function, growth, evolution, distribution, and taxonomy. The study of matter is called chemistry. Chemistry is a branch of physical science that studies the composition, structure, properties, and change of matter. Chemistry includes topics such as the properties of individual atoms, how atoms form chemical bonds to create chemical compounds, the interactions of substances through intermolecular forces that give matter its general properties, and the interactions between substances through chemical reactions to form different substances. Chemistry is sometimes called the central science because it bridges other natural sciences, including physics, geology, and biology. The history of chemistry can be traced to alchemy, which has been practiced for several millennia in various parts of the world. So this, both of them have to do with matter, but chemistry is a branch of physical science that studies the composition, structure, and properties and change of matter, whereas physics is how matter exists and how it moves. So there's some similarities between there. If you look at on quantum mechanics, that's the chemical makeup of how things work. Alchemy is sort of alchemy was how to make gold, how to make a regular rock into gold, and so they would try to take one thing and make it into something else. And if you look at particle accelerators, I think there's a way to sort of knock some of those electrons out of the clouds and sort of change one element to another element. The study of computers is called computer science. There's no such thing as darkness, only the absence of life. There's no such thing as death, only the absence of life. Now, light, is that a photon? Is it electromagnetic? Is it both? Neither? Well, find out next Sunday on Sunday School for the Revolutionary Humanist. Sunday School for Scientists, Sunday School for the Revolutionary Humanist. Revolutionary Humanist isn't just about science for me. Humanist is also breaking the hierarchy and us being the greatest individuals we could be. But power is just a tool, just like anything else. So I'm going to talk about light on next Sunday for the Sunday School for Scientists. So I'm John Masters. It's January 24th, 2016. Watch this video. I'll watch it actually myself over and over again to make sure these concepts become a part of me and they become a part of my being, and I don't have to relearn it ever again. I will know them just like any of these religious fuckheads know their sacred texts. Okay? And that was the reason why I threw Gilgamesh in there. So yeah. Jonathan Masters, January 24, 2016. I want to say Braunston, Burnside, maybe Somerset. I don't know. Kentucky. So, peace. See you later, America.